Imagine the sound of a long, slow breath being drawn in by the world, the rhythmic, heavy pull of the tide against a shore that no longer exists. There is a specific kind of silence that lives at the bottom of the ocean, a weight of water that feels less like a liquid and more like a thick blue veil of time itself. Long before the first ink was dried upon a parchment map, and before the great mountain ranges of the north were seen as the definitive borders of the world, there was a different arrangement of earth and salt. Deep in the southern reaches of the Indian Ocean, where the currents now run cold and dark, many believe there once lay a vast emerald expanse, a cradle of life and wisdom known to the ancient Tamil poets as Kumari Kandam. It is a name that tastes of salt and memory, a place where the horizon was not a limit, but an invitation into a world of endless summer and profound stillness. The Indian Ocean is a restless giant, its surface constantly shifting in a dance of turquoise and sapphire, yet beneath that movement lies a profound stability. For thousands of years, the waves have whispered stories to the coastlines of India, Sri Lanka, and Madagascar, stories of a land that once connected them all like a bridge of living green. We often think of the earth as a permanent, unchanging stage, but in the eyes of deep time, the continents are like slow-moving clouds, drifting and dissolving over millions of years. This concept of a lost southern continent is not merely a myth to those who live along the shores of the Indian peninsula. It is a part of their ancestral heartbeat, a whispered history of a time when the world was larger, and the secrets of the stars were kept by a civilization that lived in harmony with the rising and falling of the tides. As you settle into the stillness of this moment, perhaps adjusting your blankets or closing your eyes, you are joining a long lineage of dreamers who have looked out over the water and wondered what lies beneath. It is a comfort to know that even as the world moves at a frantic pace, there are places of absolute quiet waiting to be explored in the mind. Here at the Slumber Archives, we gather these fragments of the past and weave them into stories to help you find your way to sleep, publishing new history narrations every single day. If you find these journeys into the deep past a peaceful way to end your evening, you might consider subscribing so that you never miss a night of discovery. A simple like on this video also helps our quiet community grow, allowing others to find their way to these calm waters. But for now, let us leave the modern world behind and return to the whispering tides of the ancient South. The maps we hold today are merely snapshots of a single fleeting moment in the life of our planet. If we were to peel back the layers of the ocean, we would find a landscape of drowned valleys and submerged mountain peaks that were once bathed in sunlight. In the field of archaeology, we often speak of stratigraphy, which is simply the study of layers, the way the earth piles one era on top of another, like the pages of a very old book. But when the sea rises, those pages become soaked and blurred, making it difficult for modern science to read the fine print of the past. There is a period known as the Younger Dryas, a time roughly 12,800 years ago when the climate of the earth underwent a sudden and dramatic shift. It was a time of melting ice and surging seas, a moment when the geography of the world was rewritten in a matter of centuries. During this era, the sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, swallowing low-lying coastal plains and turning peninsulas into islands. For the people of Kumari Kandam, this was not a theoretical change in a textbook. It was a slow, inevitable migration away from the encroaching blue. Imagine a civilization that lived for thousands of years in a land of fertile river valleys and aromatic forests, only to watch as the salt water claimed their temples, their libraries, and their homes. The Tamil traditions speak of 49 territories, or nadus, that were lost to the sea, a vast kingdom that stretched from the tip of modern India all the way toward the distant shores of Africa and Australia. It was said to be a place where the first great academies of literature, the Sangams, were founded, where poets and sages gathered to codify the laws of nature and the beauty of the human soul. The air in this lost world would have been thick with the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, carried on a breeze that never knew the bite of frost. It was a primordial world, existing long before the rise of the pharaohs or the building of the great ziggurats in Mesopotamia. In this deep time, the boundaries between the human and the divine were thought to be thin, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the celestial movements of the moon and the planets. The people of the south were master navigators, not just of the sea, but of the inner landscapes of the mind. They understood the interconnectedness of all things, a philosophy that suggests that nothing is ever truly lost, but merely transformed into another state of being. As we contemplate these submerged ruins, we must confront the limits of what we know. Radiocarbon dating, the process by which scientists measure the decay of carbon atoms to determine the age of organic material, can only tell us so much when the evidence is buried under miles of silt and pressurized water. The ocean is a jealous guardian of its treasures, and much of what we seek remains hidden in the dark, silent canyons of the seafloor. Yet the memory of Kumari Kandam persists in the oral traditions and the ancient verses that have been passed down through 60 generations. It is a history written in the heart before it was ever written on a page. There is a certain peace in acknowledging that the earth holds secrets we may never fully uncover. It reminds us that we are part of a much larger, much older story, one that began long before our birth and will continue long after we are gone. The lost continent of the south is a metaphor for the forgotten parts of ourselves, the deep, quiet places where our oldest memories reside. As the years passed, the high peaks of Kumari Kandam became the islands of the Indian Ocean, and the great plains became the seabed where the whales now sing their own ancient songs. In the twilight of this lost world, one can almost see the flickering lights of the last cities as the water began to lap at their gates. There was no panic, perhaps, but a dignified retreat, a carrying of seeds and scrolls to the higher ground of the northern mountains. They brought with them the foundations of a culture that would eventually blossom into the vibrant civilizations of southern India, leaving behind a drowned world that remains as a whisper in the tide. The waves continue their steady work, smoothing the edges of sunken stones and washing over the remains of a history that refuses to be forgotten. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, let the image of this southern cradle fill your mind. See the long golden beaches where the ancestors of humanity once walked, and feel the cool, gentle mist of a waterfall in a valley that has not seen the sun in 10,000 years. The world is vast, and the ocean is deep, and in the stillness of the night, the barriers between the past and the present begin to dissolve. The history of Kumari Kandam is not just a story of loss, but a story of endurance. A reminder that even when the lands we love are reclaimed by the sea, the spirit of what we created remains, drifting in the currents, waiting for a quiet moment to be remembered once again. The tides continue their rhythmic pull, a heartbeat that has drummed against the shore since the world was young. Each wave is a reminder of the cycle of rising and falling, of building and dissolving, of waking and sleeping. In the great span of deep time, our lives are like the foam on the crest of a wave, beautiful and brief, yet part of the same eternal ocean. And so, we let the weight of the water and the shadows of the past guide us into a restful dark, where the lost continents of our dreams are waiting to be explored. The world is quiet now, the maps are folded away, and the only sound is the gentle, persistent whisper of the sea. Imagine a single palm leaf, dried and yellowed by the passage of centuries, inscribed with the delicate, swirling script of a language that feels as old as the earth itself. On these fragile surfaces, preserved by generations of scholars who understood that memory is the only shield against oblivion, we find the first whispers of a kingdom that no longer appears on any modern map. Long before the great empires of the north rose to prominence, the Tamil people spoke of the Pandyan kings, a lineage of rulers whose origins are said to be rooted not in the soil we walk upon today, but in a vast, fertile expanse of land that the Indian Ocean has since reclaimed. These early texts, known collectively as the Sangam literature, do not describe a mythic fairyland or a realm of gods, but rather a structured, sophisticated society that thrived in a territory they called Kumari Kandam. In these verses, the Pandyan kings are portrayed as the great patrons of wisdom, presiding over a golden age of poetry and philosophy that stretched back into a time so distant it defies the conventional chronologies of the modern world. The heart of this vanished civilization was the Sangam, a series of legendary literary academies where thousands of poets gathered to refine their craft and document the essence of human experience. The first of these, the primary Sangam, is said to have been held in a city called Madurai, but not the vibrant, bustling Madurai that stands in Tamil Nadu today. This was the old Madurai, a coastal capital situated far to the south, in a region where the horizons were wide and the air was thick with the scent of sandalwood and sea salt. According to the ancient commentaries, this first academy lasted for over 4,000 years, a span of time that seems impossible to our modern ears, yet it speaks to a deep cultural memory of a stability that existed before the world was broken by the rising tides. There is a profound stillness in the way these texts describe the work of the poets. They were not merely writers, they were the keepers of the collective soul, ensuring that the laws of nature, the nuances of love and the lineages of kings were etched into the mind of the people. As we drift further into the history of these academies, we encounter the second Sangam, which was established after the sea first began to encroach upon the southern territories. The capital shifted to a place called Kapatapuram, another coastal jewel that the old poems describe with a sense of bittersweet beauty. Even then, as the waves grew closer and the salt began to reclaim the low-lying fields, the pursuit of knowledge remained the highest calling. The Pandyan kings continued to sit upon their thrones, watching the southern stars and funding the scholars who sought to map the mysteries of existence. In the quiet of the night, one can almost hear the scratching of styluses on palm leaves, a rhythmic, steady sound like the ticking of a clock, marking the hours of a civilization that was slowly, inevitably, being surrendered to the deep. The transition from the old southern capitals to the modern city of Madurai is not merely a change of location, but a story of survival and relocation in the face of a changing planet. When the waters finally claimed the second capital, the survivors moved north, carrying with them the remnants of their libraries and the memory of their drowned homes. This northern relocation is a pivotal moment in the history of the Tamil people, representing a bridge between a prehistoric world of vast southern continents and the familiar geography of the Indian subcontinent. The Madurai we know today, with its towering temples and ancient streets, is a shadow and a tribute to that lost southern city, a place built to keep the fire of the Sangams burning even when the hearth of the ancestors had been extinguished by the tide. When we look at these accounts through the lens of modern science, we find ourselves standing at the edge of a great mystery. Mainstream archaeology often views the timelines of the Sangams as hyperbolic or symbolic, pointing to the lack of physical ruins on the current coastline as evidence that these stories are purely legendary. However, we must consider the nature of the sea. During the period known as the Younger Dryas, a sudden and dramatic cooling and subsequent warming of the Earth approximately 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose with a terrifying speed. Glaciers melted, and the vast coastal plains that once connected India to the islands of the south were inundated. For a civilization living on the edge of the water, this would not have been a slow change, but a series of catastrophic pulses that would have erased cities, farmlands, and entire ways of life. The stratigraphy of the ocean floor, The study of the layers of sediment and rock that have accumulated over eons suggests that there are vast areas of the continental shelf that were once dry land. In the silence of the deep, under layers of silt and the weight of billions of gallons of water, the foundations of the first Madurai may still rest, undisturbed by the passage of time. The Sangam literature may be the only surviving map of a world that existed before the maps were redrawn by the hand of nature. It is a reminder that our history is often written in the gaps between what we can prove and what we can remember. The cultural significance of these lost academies cannot be overstated. For the Tamil people, the Sangams represent the very foundation of their identity, a belief that their language and their wisdom are as ancient as the land itself. The poets of the first and second Sangams were said to include not only humans, but also sages and deities, blurring the line between the earthly and the eternal. This suggests a time when the veil between the physical world and the spiritual realm was thinner, and when the pursuit of truth was a communal effort that spanned thousands of years. As the years passed and the third Sangam was established in the current city of Madurai, the tone of the literature changed. It became more grounded, more focused on the realities of the present, yet it never lost that lingering sense of longing for the world that had been lost to the waves. We are left to wonder about the millions of lives that were lived in those southern territories, the farmers who tilled the soil, the sailors who navigated by the stars of a different sky, and the mothers who sang their children to sleep in houses that are now home to the coral and the kelp. The loss of Kumari Kandam was not just the loss of land, but the loss of a library of human experience that we are only now beginning to piece together through the fragments of ancient verse. The Pandyan kings, in their wisdom, knew that the sea could take their cities, but it could not take their stories as long as there was someone left to tell them. And so, we sit with the weight of these forgotten ages, feeling the slow pulse of the ocean as it breathes against the shore. The water is a keeper of secrets, a vast, dark archive that holds the truth of our origins in its cold embrace. As we listen to the echoes of the Sangam poets, we are reminded that everything we build is temporary, but the quest for understanding is eternal. The lost continent of the South remains a ghost in our collective memory, a reminder of a time when the world was larger, and the horizon held the promise of a kingdom that would never fade. The darkness of the deep sea is much like the darkness of sleep, a place where the boundaries of the self dissolve, and we are allowed to wander through the ruins of our own dreams, searching for the whispers of a past that still calls to us from beneath the waves. The scent of sandalwood does not vanish easily, even when submerged under 1,000 fathoms of salt and silt. It is said that if one could descend into the crushing stillness of the Indian Ocean, past the reach of the sun's last golden fingers, they might still find the aromatic ghosts of forests that once breathed under a different sky. To understand the geography of Kumari Kandam is to map a land that exists now only in the cadence of ancient Tamil verse, a realm defined by the embrace of two great arteries of water, the Pahruli and the Kumari. These were not merely rivers. They were the lifeblood of a sprawling expanse that bridged the distance between the tip of India and the distant shores of Africa and Australia, a continental bridge known to some as Lemuria, but cherished by the poets as the birthplace of civilization itself. Imagine, if you will, a world divided into 49 distinct territories, 49 nadus that stitched together a tapestry of human achievement and natural wonder. These were not arbitrary lines on a map, but provinces defined by the texture of the earth and the temperament of the winds. There were 7 coconut lands, 7 hilly lands, 7 coastal tracts, and 7 forest regions, each flowing into the next with a seamless grace that modern geography struggles to replicate. The land did not merely provide, it overflowed. Between the banks of the Pahruli and the Kumari, the earth was a vibrant, deep emerald, nourished by a network of irrigation that moved with the precision of a heartbeat. The Pahruli River was particularly famed for its engineered beauty, its waters channeled through stone and earth to turn the central plains into an endless garden of grain and fruit. As we wander deeper into this sunken landscape, we find ourselves standing upon the fertile plains of the interior, where the air is heavy with the moisture of a perpetual tropical spring. In this lost world, the seasons did not battle one another. There was no harsh winter to wither the vine, no scorching drought to crack the soil. Instead, the climate remained in a state of soft, humid equilibrium, a constant nurturing warmth that allowed the flora to reach heights that seem impossible to our modern eyes. The trees were giants, their canopies weaving together to create a living ceiling that filtered the sunlight into a soft, dappled green. Within these forests, the sandalwood grew in such abundance that its fragrance was carried by the trade winds far out to sea, serving as a lighthouse of scent for the navigators of the ancient world. Beyond the plains, the horizon was broken by mountain ranges that rose like the spines of sleeping leviathans. These were the Mani Malai, the mountains of gems, where the earth surrendered its treasures to the surface. It is told that the rains falling upon these peaks would wash rubies and sapphires into the streams, carrying the wealth of the mountains down to the doorsteps of the common folk. This was a land of geological generosity, where the very stones underfoot felt imbued with a quiet, ancient power. The mountains acted as a shield, catching the monsoon clouds and turning them into gentle mists that draped the valleys in a silver veil every morning, keeping the world cool and quiet as the sun began its slow trek across the heavens. The population that inhabited these 49 territories was vast, yet they lived in a strange harmony with the scale of the continent. There were no crowded, suffocating cities as we know them today. Instead, the Nadus were a collection of sprawling garden capitals where the architecture was designed to mirror the flow of the rivers and the curve of the hills. Because the climate was so forgiving, the boundaries between the indoors and the outdoors were thin, almost non-existent. People lived among the groves, their homes built of timber and thatch that smelled of the earth, surrounded by the constant hum of life, the chatter of tropical birds, the rustle of the wind through the palms, and the distant, rhythmic thrum of the ocean. In the language of modern science, we might speak of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt climate change some 12,800 years ago, when the melting of the great ice sheets caused the sea levels to rise with a terrifying, relentless speed. We speak of stratigraphy and radiocarbon dating to pin these stories to a timeline we can control, but the legends of Kumari Kandam do not care for such rigid markers. To the ancient mind, the sinking of the land was not just a geological event. It was a cosmic exhaling. The ocean was not an enemy, but a god reclaiming what had been lent to the surface for a time. As the waters crept higher, reclaiming the 7 coconut lands and then the 7 forest tracts, the geography of the world was rewritten in the dark. The Pahruli River, once the pride of the southern kings, was the first to be swallowed. Its sophisticated dams and stone-lined banks vanished beneath the waves, turning the fresh, life-giving water into salt and foam. The mountains of gems became islands, then reefs, and finally mere memories whispered by sailors who noticed the water turning a different shade of blue over certain coordinates. The sandalwood forests, with their deep roots and ancient wisdom, were drowned where they stood, their wood preserved by the cold and the pressure, creating a silent, petrified wilderness at the bottom of the sea. It is difficult for us, in our fast-moving world, to grasp the scale of such a loss. We are used to things being permanent, our cities of concrete, our digital archives, our borders drawn in ink. But the geography of Kumari Kandam reminds us that the earth is a fluid thing. The bedrock beneath our feet is merely a temporary stage. As you drift closer to sleep, try to visualize the map of this lost realm, not as a static image, but as a living, breathing entity. See the 49 Nadus as they once were, vibrant and green, stretching out into a horizon that seemed to have no end. Feel the soft, humid air of that eternal spring against your skin, and hear the slow, steady pulse of the Kumari River as it winds its way through the sandalwood groves. There is a peace in knowing that such a world existed, even if it now resides in the realm of myth. The silence of the deep sea is not an empty silence. It is a heavy, weighted quiet, filled with the presence of everything that has been lost. The mountains are still there, in a way, their peaks now mapping the valleys of the ocean floor. The plains are still there, covered in the fine grey dust of millennia, and perhaps in the deepest part of our subconscious, the geography of Kumari Kandam is still the map we use when we dream. We are all, in some sense, inhabitants of a sunken continent, carrying within us the blueprints of a paradise that the water could never truly wash away. As the years passed into centuries and the centuries into millennia, the memory of the 49 territories became a song, a long mournful melody sung by the survivors who fled north to the shores of modern-day Tamil Nadu. They spoke of the lost Nadus with a reverence that bordered on the sacred, describing the placement of every hill and the curve of every stream as if by reciting the geography they could keep the land from eroding entirely from the mind. They told of the great academies, the Sangams that were held in cities now lost to the sharks and the silt. They remembered the specific taste of the fruit from the southernmost groves, a sweetness that they claimed could never be found again in the lesser soils of the north. We must wonder what else remains down there, hidden by the darkness of the deep sea mentioned before. Is it possible that the ruins of these 49 territories are waiting for a moment when the earth shifts once more? Or is their purpose to remain hidden, to serve as a reminder of the limits of human knowledge? We peer through the lens of sonar and the mathematics of oceanography, catching glimpses of anomalies and structures that defy easy explanation, yet the full picture remains elusive. The geography of the sunken realm is a puzzle with half its pieces cast into the void, leaving us to fill the gaps with the light of our own imagination. The weight of forgotten ages is a heavy blanket, pulling us down into a state of rest where the logic of the waking world no longer applies. In this space the Pahruli River still flows, the sandalwood forests still scent the air. The 49 Nadus remain whole and unbroken, a vast green expanse beneath a sun that never sets. We are travellers in a landscape of deep time, where the past is not behind us, but beneath us. Waiting in the stillness, whispering through the currents, inviting us to forget the shore and find our way back to the heart of the lost south. To understand the governance of Kumari Kandam is to set aside our modern notions of borders, bureaucracies, and the restless ticking of the clock. In the texts of the Silapatikaram and the Manimekalai, the early Pandya kings are not merely political figures, but guardians of a cosmic order that stretched across 10,000 years. Imagine a lineage so ancient that its beginning is lost in the silver haze of the pre-flood era, where a single monarch might oversee his people for centuries, his wisdom deepening as the stars slowly shifted their positions in the heavens. These were the kings of the first Sangam, the primordial academy of poets and scholars who ruled from the city of Thenmadurai. It is said that the Pandya kings were born of the moon itself, and their reign reflected that lunar serenity, a steady, cooling influence over a land that flourished under the principles of Aram, or righteous living. The structure of this society was not built upon the accumulation of wealth, but upon the refinement of the soul. the 49 nadus, or provinces, functioned as a harmonious collective where the king's primary duty was to ensure that the songs of the poets never ceased and that the altars of the gods were never dry. In this golden age, governance was an act of gardening, a patient tending to the growth of human potential. There were no standing armies as we understand them today, for the boundaries of the continent were protected by the vastness of the Indian Ocean and the spiritual potency of the land itself. The kings were poets first and warriors only when the balance of nature was threatened. They sat upon thrones carved from the heartwood of ancient sandalwood trees, surrounded by counsellors who spoke in verse, debating the nuances of grammar and the movements of the planets long into the quiet nights. As the centuries drifted by, this stability allowed for an explosion of artistry that our modern world can scarcely conceive. The air of Kumari Kandam was thick with the sound of the yaj, a multi-stringed harp whose melodies were said to be capable of making the rain fall or the flowers bloom out of season. Music was not a performance but a form of mathematics, a way of aligning the human heartbeat with the rhythm of the tides. The ancient Tamils developed a complex system of pal, the precursors to the ragas, which were designed to be played at specific hours of the day to mirror the shifting light. In the morning, the music was bright and crisp like the salt air of the coast. By midday, it became deep and resonant like the shade of a banyan tree, and by evening, it dissolved into the haunting, melancholic tones of the deep ocean. Philosophy in the lost South was not confined to dusty scrolls or the ivory towers of academia. It was a lived experience, woven into the very fabric of daily life. The concept of Yathum Ure, Yavarum Kelia, every country is my own country and every person is my kinsman, was not a lofty ideal, but the foundational reality of their civilization. They looked upon the world with a sense of radical interconnectedness, believing that the spirit within a tiger or a lotus flower was no different from the spirit within a king. This profound empathy led to a society where the heights of intellectual achievement were matched by a deep humility. Their architecture, though long since claimed by the silt and the currents, was said to be designed in accordance with the Vastu Shastra, ensuring that every home and temple was a microcosm of the universe, allowing the breath of the earth to flow freely through its halls. In this submerged world, the line between nature and civilization was beautifully blurred. The cities of the Pandyas did not conquer the landscape, they invited it in. Imagine wide avenues lined with trees that bore fruit all year round, where wild peacocks danced on the rooftops of libraries and tame deer wandered through the marketplaces. The Pahruli River was engineered with such grace that its waters irrigated vast plains without ever disturbing the nesting birds along its banks. The ancient Tamils possessed a sophisticated understanding of ecology, practicing a form of agriculture that enriched the soil rather than depleting it. They saw the mountains of the Kumari range not as resources to be mined, but as the spine of the world, sacred and untouchable. The wealth of the kingdom was measured in the clarity of its water and the diversity of its forests, a treasury of life that was guarded more fiercely than any hoard of gold. The philosophical thought of this era was preoccupied with the concept of deep time, or the yugas. They understood that they were living in a period of immense grace, but they were also keenly aware of the impermanence of all things. This awareness did not bring them sorrow, but rather a heightened appreciation for the present moment. Every poem written, every bronze statue cast, and every philosophical treatise debated was an offering to the eternal. They practiced a form of mindfulness that allowed them to see the infinite within the finite, the entire history of the ocean within a single drop of spray. It was this perspective that allowed their civilization to remain stable for thousands of years, avoiding the frantic cycles of expansion and collapse that characterize our own history. We might look for the physical evidence of this golden age in the stratigraphy of the ocean floor, the study of rock layers and sediment that tells the story of the Earth's crust, but the true legacy of Kumari Kandam lives on in the Tamil language itself. Linguists often remark on the classical nature of Tamil, a language that has remained remarkably consistent for millennia. It is a language built for poetry and precision, containing words for emotions and natural phenomena that have no direct translation in English. It is as if the language is a vessel carrying the echoes of that lost continent across the rising seas of time. When a modern poet speaks an ancient verse, they are breathing the same air as the scholars of the first Sangam, tapping into a reservoir of wisdom that refuses to be drowned. The peaceful coexistence of nature and man in Kumari Kandam was perhaps most evident in their relationship with the sea. They were a maritime people, yet they did not view the ocean as a barrier or a mystery to be feared. They understood the currents and the monsoons as the breathing of a great sentient being. Their ships, constructed from teak and bound with coconut fibre, travelled to distant lands, carrying spices, gems, and philosophy, but they always returned to the southern continent as if drawn by a magnetic force. There is a sense in the old legends that the land itself was alive, responding to the virtue of its rulers. As long as the kings remained just and the people remained wise, the mountains remained high and the sea remained at bay. But beneath this tranquility, the earth was changing. To the north, the great ice sheets of the last glacial period were beginning their slow, agonizing retreat. This process, known to geologists as the deglaciation, was not a steady melt, but a series of violent pulses. As the heavy weight of the ice lifted from the northern continents, the crust of the earth shifted and the global sea levels began to creep upward. In the deep time of the late Pleistocene, the world was a shifting puzzle of rising waters and sinking lands. The people of Kumari Kandam, for all their wisdom and artistry, were living on the edge of a geological transformation that no amount of poetry could stay. As the years passed, the coastal villages began to notice that the high tide marks were reaching further inland each season. The salt air began to wither the sandalwood trees that grew nearest to the shore. The Pahruli River, once a gentle provider, began to swell with the backflow of the ocean. Yet the golden age did not end in a day. It was a slow fading, a long twilight, where the heights of their culture reached even greater peaks of refinement, as if in defiance of the encroaching blue. The music grew more intricate, the philosophy more profound, as they contemplated the nature of change and the persistence of the soul. They were a civilization preparing for a transition, not into darkness, but into the depths, leaving behind a memory of a world where man and nature walked hand in hand, a world that now sleeps beneath the waves, waiting for the silence to be understood. The sound of a distant, low rumble begins to vibrate through the floorboards of the great libraries, a sound not of the earth shaking, but of the deep water shifting its weight. For generations, the scholars of the first capital, then Madurai, had watched the tides with a growing sense of quietude, noticing how the salt spray reached further into the gardens each season, and how the ancient stone piers seemed to sit lower against the horizon. They called this phenomenon the Cradle Kol, a term that translates most elegantly as the seizure by the ocean, or the devouring of the land by the sea. It was not a sudden, crashing wall of water in these early days, but a patient, relentless reclamation. In the heart of Thenmadurai, the first of the great Tamil academies, the primary Sangam, continued its work even as the coastal perimeter began to soften into marshland. The poets sat upon woven mats, their reed pens scratching against palm leaves, documenting the lineage of kings and the movements of the stars, while the scent of damp earth and brine filled the air. To them, the encroaching ocean was not an enemy to be fought with walls of stone or cries of defiance. Instead, it was viewed through the lens of a vast cosmic cycle, a manifestation of the breathing of the universe itself. The ancient texts spoke of the yugas, the immense stretches of time that govern the rise and fall of all things, suggesting that just as the moon pulls the tides, the great wheel of time pulls the very boundaries of the continents. As the waters rose, the spiritual interpretation of the event became one of profound surrender. They believed that the earth was being purified, that the old world was being washed clean to make way for a new expression of the spirit, even if that meant the physical heart of their empire must descend into the blue. As the years passed, the Cradle call intensified, moving from a seasonal nuisance to a permanent transformation of the geography. The great city of Thenmadurai, with its golden spires and its 1,000-year-old banyan trees, began to find its lower streets perpetually submerged. The resilience of the culture was found not in their ability to stop the tide, but in their graceful movement away from it. This was the first great migration, a slow and deliberate journey northward and further inland toward the safety of the higher plateaus. They carried with them what was most precious, not gold or heavy statuary, but knowledge. The palm leaf manuscripts were wrapped in oiled silks and carried in cedar chests, shielded from the humidity. The master musicians carried their lutes, and the architects carried the geometric secrets of the temples in their minds. There is a quiet beauty in the image of a civilization in motion, a steady stream of people walking away from their ancestral homes, looking back one last time to see the reflections of their palaces shimmering in the newborn lagoons. The loss of the first capital was a wound in the collective memory, yet it served to strengthen the resolve of the survivors. They understood that the physical world was a shifting tapestry, but the essence of Kumari Kandam, its language, its rhythm, and its connection to the divine, was portable. As they established new settlements further into the interior of the continent, the architecture changed to reflect their new reality. The foundations became deeper, the structures more elevated, as if they were learning to live in a world that might at any moment decide to return to the depths. This period of transition is often overlooked by those who seek only for ruins, for it is a history of movement rather than stasis. It is the story of a culture that refused to vanish, even as the map beneath their feet was being redrawn by the hand of the Southern Ocean. Meanwhile, the scholars who remained on the shrinking coastline observed the changes with a scientific detachment that bordered on the mystical. They noted the way the birds changed their flight paths and how the deep-sea fish began to appear in the shallow estuaries. From a modern perspective, we might look at this through the lens of paleoclimatology, perhaps connecting these events to the end of the last ice age, a time known as the Younger Dryas. Around 11,600 years ago, the global climate underwent a series of rapid and dramatic shifts. The melting of the great ice sheets in the north caused a significant rise in sea levels across the globe, a process known as meltwater pulses. To the people of Kumari Kandam, this was not a matter of carbon cycles or glacial retreat, but a divine orchestration. They saw the rising waters as a mirror to the rising consciousness of their people, a reminder that nothing in the material realm is permanent. The first great deluge was a lesson in the fragility of the earth's crust and the power of the hidden currents. As the original Sangam was finally abandoned to the waves, the poets wrote of the lost Madurai, a city that would forever exist in the dreams of the Tamil people. It became a symbol of the Golden Age, a place where the gods walked among men, and where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the sound of sacred chants. The water did not just destroy, it preserved. By claiming the city, the ocean took it out of the reach of time and decay, holding it in a cold, silent embrace where no war or famine could ever touch it again. And so, the survivors moved on, settling in the region that would eventually become the second capital, Kapadapuram. Here, they attempted to recreate the glory of the lost world, building new academies and new temples that mirrored the ones they had left behind. But the memory of the first Cradle call remained like a low hum in the back of their minds. They knew now that the land was a guest of the sea, and that the sea was a patient host. The resilience of their culture was tested as they integrated the trauma of the loss into their mythology, turning a catastrophe into a foundational story of rebirth. They taught their children that to be a child of Kumari Kandam was to be a person of the water, to understand that the flow of life requires us to let go of the shore. As the centuries rolled on, the deep time of the continent continued to unfold, the stratigraphy of the region, the layers of sediment and rock that tell the story of the earth, began to bury the remnants of the old world under thick blankets of silt and sand. If a modern archaeologist were to dive into those waters today, they would find the challenges of underwater research nearly insurmountable. The shifting currents of the Indian Ocean and the immense pressure of the depths make the search for radiocarbon evidence or structural remains a task of near impossible proportions. Yet, the absence of physical evidence is not necessarily an evidence of absence. It is simply a testament to the thoroughness of the ocean's reclamation. There is a profound peace in considering this first great deluge as a part of a larger, rhythmic breath. The civilization of Kumari Kandam did not fail. It simply changed its state. It moved from the solid ground of history into the fluid realm of legend, a transition that allowed it to survive in a way that stone and mortar never could. The poets of the second Sangam would look out over the new coastline, their eyes searching the horizon where their old home once stood, and they would see not a graveyard, but a sanctuary. They believed that the ancestors were still there, beneath the waves, continuing their meditations in the silent halls of the drowned city. This spiritual resilience allowed the culture to flourish for thousands of years more, even as the shadow of the next great seizure began to loom on the horizon. The weight of forgotten ages is not a burden, but a foundation, a reminder that we are all walking upon the layers of worlds that came before, and that the silence of the ocean is full of voices, waiting for the right moment to be heard. In the quiet corners of 19th century libraries, where the scent of aging parchment meets the soft flicker of oil lamps, a different kind of discovery was beginning to take shape, one that relied not on shovels or diving bells, but on the curious patterns of life itself. It is a strange thing to consider that the secrets of a sunken empire might be found in the golden eyes of a small nocturnal primate. Yet in 1864, a zoologist named Philip Sclater found himself staring at a map of the world and seeing a puzzle that did not fit. Sclater was fascinated by lemurs, those ghost-like creatures with long tails and haunting cries. He noted with growing bewilderment that their fossil remains were found in the red soil of Madagascar and the lush jungles of India, yet they were entirely absent from the nearby African mainland and the Middle East. According to the rigid laws of biology, these animals could not have crossed the vast, churning expanse of the Indian Ocean on their own. And so, in an article titled "The Mammals of Madagascar," Sclater proposed a solution that would ignite the imagination of the world. He suggested that a great, sprawling landmass had once connected India to southern Africa, serving as a biological bridge across the deep. He gave this lost world a name that would eventually echo through the halls of history and mysticism alike. He called it Lemuria. At the time, the scientific community did not view this as a flight of fancy or a mythic tale, but as a necessary piece of the geological record. This was an era before we understood the slow, rhythmic dance of plate tectonics. before we knew that the continents themselves drift like giant rafts upon a sea of molten rock. In the mid-19th century, the only way to explain the presence of similar flora and fauna on distant shores was to imagine land bridges, immense corridors of earth that had since been swallowed by the rising tides. As Sclater's hypothesis gained ground, it inadvertently brushed against something much older, something that had been whispered in the Tamil-speaking lands for thousands of years. While the Western scientists were busy sketching maps of Lemuria to explain the migration of lemurs and orchids, the scholars of southern India recognized a familiar shape in the drawings. To them, this was not a new discovery. It was a scientific validation of Kumari Kandam, the ancestral home that had been lost to the sea during the great cataclysms of the past. The intersection of Western biogeography and ancient Tamil oral tradition created a profound resonance, a moment where the modern world seemed to catch up with the memories of the old. For the Tamil people, the stories of the Sangams, those great academies of poets and sages that met on a vanished southern continent, were more than mere metaphors. They were a historical reality, passed down through generations of oral recitation. When Sclater spoke of a drowned continent in the Indian Ocean, he was providing a physical framework for a cultural trauma that had never truly healed. The scientific community's temporary embrace of Lemuria offered a bridge between the empirical and the ethereal, a way to speak of the lost world using the language of the academy. It was a time when the boundaries between what could be proven and what could be felt were beautifully blurred, and for a few decades, the existence of a lost Indian Ocean continent was considered a mainstream scientific possibility. Imagine the Victorian naturalists, with their brass telescopes and leather-bound journals, tracing the lines of the ocean floor and imagining the mountains that once climbed toward the sun, where now only the dark currents flow. They spoke of the Permian and Triassic periods, times of deep antiquity, when the earth was a different shape entirely. They looked at the distribution of granite and the way certain mountain ranges seemed to terminate abruptly at the water's edge, only to reappear hundreds of miles away on a different coast. These were the early days of biogeography, a field that seeks to understand why life is where it is, and in those days the answer was often found in the depths of the sea. The idea of Lemuria became a vessel for everything we did not yet understand about the Earth's shifting skin. It was a placeholder for the unknown, a name given to the silence that exists between the continents. As the years passed, the Lemurian hypothesis began to expand beyond the realm of zoology. It was adopted by occultists and philosophers who saw in this lost land the cradle of humanity itself, a place of pure spirit and advanced wisdom that predated the rise of the known civilizations. But even as the theories became more esoteric, the core of the idea remained rooted in that initial observation of the natural world. There was a sense of profound melancholy in the realization that the earth is a graveyard of lost places, that for every forest we walk through today, there is another forest, equally vast and vibrant, resting in the cold pressure of the abyss. The scientific embrace of a lost continent allowed people to look at the horizon and see not just an empty line of water, but a doorway to a forgotten era. This period of intellectual history reminds us of the limits of our own perception. We often believe that the world as we see it today is the way it has always been, yet the story of Lemuria teaches us that our maps are merely snapshots in time. The biogeography of the 19th century was a noble attempt to reconstruct a broken mirror, using the shards of fossils and the patterns of living things to glimpse a reflection of the past. And while the theory of plate tectonics would eventually provide a different explanation for the lemurs of Madagascar, showing that the continents were once joined in a single supercontinent called Gondwana before drifting apart, the emotional weight of the lost continent remained. The shift in scientific consensus did not erase the feeling that something had been lost. Instead, it moved the mystery from the surface of the earth into the deeper mechanics of time. The Tamil scholars of the early 20th century watched these Western developments with a keen and critical eye. They saw the rise and fall of the Lemuria theory not as a failure of science, but as a testament to the persistence of memory. If the Westerners could imagine a continent to explain a few fossils, how much more real must that continent be when it is backed by the weight of epic poetry and the genealogies of kings? The Lemurian Hypothesis became a point of pride, a way to assert that the ancient Tamil traditions were not myths, but a form of historical record that had survived the passage of eons. It suggested that the human heart has a way of remembering the geography of its soul, even when the land itself has long since vanished beneath the waves. And so, the idea of the lost continent lived on, vibrating between the world of the laboratory and the world of the temple. It was a bridge between two ways of knowing, the analytical and the intuitive. As we contemplate the vast stretches of deep time, we must wonder how many other truths are currently hidden by the limits of our current technology or the rigidness of our modern paradigms. The story of Sclata and his lemurs is a reminder that science often begins with a sense of wonder, a realization that the world is more mysterious than it appears. It tells us that the earth is not a static thing, but a living, breathing entity that hides its history in the strata of the soil and the depths of the sea, waiting for us to develop the eyes to see what has been there all along. As the light of the 19th century faded into the 20th, the search for Kumari Kandam and Lemuria would take on new forms, moving from the study of animals to the study of the very stones beneath our feet. But the essence remained the same, a quest to recover a piece of ourselves that was left behind in the drowned world. The silence of the Indian Ocean continued to beckon, a vast blue veil draped over the ruins of a time when the world was whole, and the songs of the first poets still echoed across the southern plains. We are left to ponder the fragility of our own civilizations, built upon a crust that is constantly shifting, above a sea that is always waiting to reclaim what it once gave. The ink on a page can sometimes carry the weight of an entire submerged world, and as the 20th century dawned, the scholars of South India began to dip their pens into a deep, collective memory. They did not see the receding tides of history as a finality, but rather as a veil that could be lifted through the power of language and lineage. As the years passed, a profound synthesis began to take shape in the quiet libraries and bustling lecture halls of Tamil Nadu. It was a merging of two worlds, the scientific hypothesis of Lemuria, born from the observations of Western naturalists, and the ancient poetic tradition of Kumari Kandam, whispered through the verses of the Sangam literature. To these scholars, the lost continent was not merely a convenient explanation for the distribution of lemurs or the movement of tectonic plates. It was the cradle of their very soul. In the early decades of the 1900s, the air was thick with the spirit of revivalism. The Tamil people living under the shadow of colonial rule sought to reclaim a narrative that stretched back far beyond the arrival of European ships or even the migrations of northern tribes. They looked to the south, toward the vast blue expanse of the Indian Ocean, and saw not an empty void, but a sunken kingdom. This was the moment when the biological Lemuria was transformed into a cultural sanctuary. The scholars argued that if the cradle of humanity had indeed been a continent connecting Africa to India, then the Tamil language, with its intricate grammar and ancient roots, must be the echoes of the first human speech. They envisioned a time when the first Sangam, the great assembly of poets and sages, met in cities that now lay beneath miles of salt water, composing verses under a sun that set over lands now forgotten by the maps of man. The antiquity of the Tamil language became the cornerstone of this identity. While mainstream linguistics often seeks to categorize and date languages through comparative philology, the study of how words change over time, the proponents of Kumari Kandam saw something more eternal. They believed that the purity of their tongue was a direct inheritance from the sunken south. To them, the loss of the continent was a tragedy of cosmic proportions, a literal drowning of the golden age. This emotional connection to a lost home provided a sense of belonging and pride during an era when indigenous cultures were often marginalized. It was a way of saying that even if the land was gone, the spirit of the people remained as vast and deep as the ocean that had claimed their ancestral soil. Imagine a scholar sitting in the humid heat of Madras in the 1920s, surrounded by palm leaf manuscripts and the heavy scent of old paper. As he traces the lines of the Silapatikaram or the Manimekalai, he isn't just reading poetry. He's looking for coordinates. He is searching for the names of rivers like the Pahruli and the Kumari, which the ancient texts claim once flowed through a land that stretched for thousands of miles. In his mind, the geography of the present is a broken thing, a mere fragment of a much larger, more magnificent whole. This was not a pursuit driven by cold data alone, but by a yearning to bridge the gap between the seen and the unseen, a desire to prove that the roots of his people were anchored in the very bedrock of the earth, far beneath the shifting currents. This synthesis of ideas was a powerful tool for cultural resistance. By establishing the antiquity of Tamil civilization through the lens of a lost continent, these thinkers created a narrative that was both ancient and modern. They utilized the scientific language of the day, referencing the works of geologists and biologists to validate a tradition that felt as old as the stars. It was a bridge built across deep time, connecting the modern struggle for identity with a prehistoric era of grandeur. The lost continent became a symbol of potential, a reminder that beneath the surface of the everyday world lies a hidden depth, waiting to be rediscovered by those who know how to listen to the whispers of the past. As the decades moved forward, the image of Kumari Kandam grew more vivid in the popular imagination. It was no longer just a subject for academic debate. It became a part of the cultural landscape. Maps were drawn, showing the jagged outlines of the lost land, reaching down toward the Antarctic Circle, encompassing what is now the Maldives, the Laccadives, and beyond. These maps were not based on sonar pings or satellite imagery, which did not yet exist, but on a spiritual geography. They represented a map of the heart, a cartography of longing. The scholars spoke of the Pandyan kings who ruled over these vast territories, presiding over a civilization that had mastered the arts, the sciences, and the mysteries of the spirit long before the rise of Egypt or Mesopotamia. There is a certain melancholy in this pursuit, a recognition of the fragility of human achievement against the backdrop of geological epochs. The concept of deep time, the vast multi-million-year history of our planet, can be overwhelming, making the span of a single life or even a single empire seem like a mere flicker in the dark. But for the Tamil revivalists, this deep time was a source of strength. It suggested that their culture was not a recent development, but a survivor of cataclysms that had reshaped the very face of the world. They saw the rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, what we might now associate with the younger Dryas period, a time of abrupt climatic shifts and melting glaciers, not as a myth, but as a recorded memory of their ancestors. Meanwhile, the emotional resonance of Kumari Kandam provided a sanctuary for the mind. In a world that was rapidly changing, where traditional ways of life were being challenged by industrialization and foreign influence, the idea of a lost home offered a sense of continuity. It was a place where the values of the past were preserved in their purest form, untouched by the decay of time. The drowned world was a mirror, reflecting the highest aspirations of the people. It was a realm of perfect justice, sublime beauty, and linguistic perfection. When a narrator speaks of these things today, we must remember that for the people of that era, these were not just stories. They were a lifeline. The synthesis of Lemuria and Kumari Kandam also raised profound questions about the nature of evidence. If a civilization is swallowed by the sea, what remains? The scholars pointed to the oral traditions, the persistent myths of floods, and the unique grammatical structures of their language as the true artifacts. While a traditional archaeologist might look for pottery shards or stone foundations, the stratigraphy of the earth, the Tamil scholars were looking at the stratigraphy of the soul. They argued that the most enduring monuments are not built of stone, but of sound and memory. A word, passed down through 100 generations, could be a more reliable guide to the past than a ruined wall. And so, the lost continent of the South became a landscape of the mind, a place where the boundaries between history and myth were blurred into a beautiful, seamless whole. It was a testament to the human need for origins, for a starting point that is grounded in something greater than ourselves. As we look back at this period of intellectual ferment, we see a people reaching into the depths of the ocean to pull up the fragments of their own story, refusing to let the silence of the waves have the final word. The quest for Kumari Kandam was, and remains, a journey into the heart of what it means to remember, to hold on to a piece of the world that the tides have tried to take away. The resonance of that search continues to ripple through the years, a reminder that beneath every sea there is a story waiting to be told, and within every language there is a continent waiting to be found. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, one must stand where the land finally surrenders to the blue, at the very tip of the Indian peninsula, where three great bodies of water converge in a restless, swirling embrace. This is Kanyakumari, a place that feels less like a geographical boundary and more like a sentinel, a final stubborn fragment of a world that once stretched toward the horizon. Here, the air is thick with the scent of salt and ancient stone, and the sound of the waves is not merely a rhythmic pulse but a language of its own, whispering of the vast territories that now lie in the dark, silent depths of the Indian Ocean. In the local imagination, this is not simply a tourist destination or a point on a map. It is the gateway. It is the last remaining threshold of the lost continent, the place where the physical world ends and the memory of Kumari Kandam begins. The geography itself seems to mourn the missing land. The rocks are worn smooth by eons of tidal longing, and the horizon appears unnaturally wide, as if the eye is searching for mountains and valleys that the sea long ago claimed for its own. It is here that the legend of the goddess becomes inseparable from the landscape, a story etched into the very spray of the ocean. The goddess, Kanyakumari, the eternal virgin, stands at the edge of the world, her gaze fixed eternally toward the south. According to the ancient tales, she was meant to marry the god Shiva, but the wedding was never realized, and she remained in a state of perpetual preparation, a divine guardian waiting for a union that would never come. But in the context of the lost continent, her vigil takes on a more haunting significance. She is the watcher of the drowned world, the one who remains when everything else has been pulled beneath the surface. She is the embodiment of the land's spirit, a solitary figure standing against the encroaching tides, a symbol of resilience in the face of an overwhelming, watery oblivion. There is a profound stillness in the way the pilgrims approach these waters, a reverence that transcends simple religious observation. They come to the ghats, those stone steps that lead down into the churning surf, to perform the ritual of bathing. As they immerse themselves in the confluence of the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean, they are not merely washing away the dust of the road. They are entering a space where time feels fluid and permeable. To step into the water at Kanyakumari is to touch the same liquid shroud that covers the legendary cities of the south, to feel the cold, heavy weight of the currents that once flowed through the streets of Madurai and the lush forests of the Pandyan kings. This act of ritualistic bathing serves as a spiritual bridge, a way for the living to connect with the ghosts of a submerged civilization. The water is viewed as a repository of memory, a vast swirling archive that holds the echoes of every prayer, every song, and every life that was extinguished when the sea levels rose. During the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, that period of dramatic climatic shifts roughly 12,000 years ago, the melting of the great ice sheets caused the oceans to swell with terrifying speed. This was the era of the Younger Dryas. A sudden return to glacial conditions, followed by an abrupt, cataclysmic warming. In the span of a few generations, coastal plains that had been home to human communities for millennia were swallowed by the rising tide. To the modern scientist, this is a matter of eustatic sea level rise, a quantifiable change in the volume of the world's oceans. But to the people who inhabit the memory of Kumari Kandam, it is a wound that has never quite healed. The goddess standing at the tip of India is the scar tissue of that ancient trauma. She represents the boundary between what can be seen and what must be remembered. Her presence ensures that even though the continent is gone, it is never truly forgotten. The very name of the land, Kumari Kandam, carries her name, linking the virgin goddess to the virgin territory that remains untouched by the modern world because it is hidden away in the deep. As the morning light touches the temple spires, the sound of chanting blends with the roar of the breakers. It is a drone that seems to vibrate in the bones, a reminder of the deep time that governs our planet. We often think of the earth as a solid, permanent thing, but the history of this coastline suggests otherwise. It tells us that the world is a shifting, breathing entity, that the map we recognize today is merely a temporary sketch on a canvas that is constantly being erased and redrawn. The drowned world of the South is not a myth in the sense of a fiction. It is a myth in the sense of a truth that has been transformed into a story, so that it might survive the passage of thousands of years. Meanwhile, the currents below the surface continue their slow, relentless work. Oceanographers and marine archaeologists have long been fascinated by the shoals and ridges that extend outward from the tip of India, features like the Adams Bridge or the submerged plateaus that hint at a broader, more contiguous landmass in the distant past. They use sonar and bathymetry to map the contours of the seabed, looking for anomalies that might suggest human intervention. A straight line where there should be a curve, a pile of stones that look suspiciously like a foundation. But the sea is a jealous guardian. It covers its secrets in layers of silt and coral, turning the works of man into the architecture of the reef. And so, the search for Kumari Kandam remains a delicate dance between the tangible and the intangible. We have the geological evidence of rising seas. We have the bathymetric maps showing the vast areas of the continental shelf that were once dry land, and we have the persistent, unwavering traditions of the Tamil people who speak of a lost cradle of civilization. But the physical evidence, the pottery, the tools, the inscriptions, remains largely out of reach, buried under hundreds of feet of water and millennia of sediment. This lack of easy proof does not diminish the story. Rather, it adds to its weight. It forces us to listen more closely to the oral histories, to find the truth in the metaphors of the poets. The goddess at Kanyakumari does not speak, yet her silence is profound. She stands as a witness to the cyclical nature of time, the kalpas and the yugas of Hindu cosmology, where worlds are created and destroyed in an endless, rhythmic progression. In this view of history, the loss of a continent is not an isolated tragedy, but a necessary part of the cosmic ebb and flow. The waters that took Kumari Kandam are the same waters that will one day give rise to something new,
Every wave that breaks against the shore is a reminder of this fluidity, a reminder that we are all living on the edge of a great, unfolding mystery. As the stars begin to emerge over the dark expanse of the ocean, the lights of the temple reflect in the wet sand of the beach. The pilgrims finish their prayers and retreat from the water's edge, leaving the coast to the goddess and the wind. In these quiet moments, it is easy to imagine that the sea is not a barrier, but a veil, a thin, shimmering curtain that separates us from a world of wonders. The lost continent of the south is still there, not in the way a sunken ship is there, but in the way a dream persists after waking. It is in the cadence of the language, the structure of the rituals, and the deep ancestral pull of the southern horizon. The story of Kumari Kandam is ultimately a story about the limits of human knowledge. It humbles us, reminding us that for all our technology and our maps, there are still vast territories of our own history that remain uncharted. We are a species with a short memory, living on a planet with a very long one. But as long as the goddess stands guard at the edge of the world, and as long as the people return to the sacred waters to bathe in the memory of the drowned lands, the heart of the south will continue to beat, a steady, rhythmic pulse beneath the waves, waiting for a time when the sea might finally give up its dead and the lost world might be found once more. To understand the fate of the Tamil homeland, we must look not only to the ancient verses of the poets, but to the slow, heavy breathing of the earth itself as it woke from its long, frozen slumber. Around 14,000 years ago, the world was a vastly different landscape, a place where the geography we take for granted was still locked beneath a crown of ice. Great glaciers, miles thick, pressed down upon the northern continents, holding the world's water captive in a frozen grip. Because the water was trapped on land, the oceans were shallow, and the coastlines of the world extended far out into what are now the deep blue reaches of the sea. During this time, the southern hemisphere was a realm of vast, exposed plains. What we now call the Sunda Shelf, a submerged area of Southeast Asia, was then a massive continent-sized landmass, a fertile cradle known as Sundaland that connected the islands of Indonesia and Malaysia to the mainland. To the south and east, the Sahul Shelf bridged the gap between Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania, creating a continuous expanse of territory where today there is only the rhythmic wash of the waves. As the climate began to shift, a period known to scientists as the end of the Pleistocene era, the great thaw commenced. It was not a single sudden event, but a series of pulses, a slow, inexorable rising of the tide that spanned thousands of years. The glaciers began to weep, sending torrents of meltwater cascading into the basins of the world. This was the era of the Younger Dryas, a term geologists use to describe a brief, sharp return to glacial cold just as the world seemed to be warming, followed by a final dramatic rise in temperature that signaled the true end of the Ice Age. Imagine standing on the southern tip of India during those millennia. The shore would not have been where it is today. Instead, a traveller could have walked south for hundreds of miles across a verdant landscape that no longer exists on any modern map. This was the Comorin Ridge, a great underwater mountain range that stretches from the tip of Kanyakumari toward the island of Madagascar and the Chagos archipelago. Today, it is a drowned spine of rock, hidden beneath the silt and the pressure of the Indian Ocean, but 14,000 years ago, it was the backbone of a world. The submergence of this ridge matches with haunting precision the timelines preserved in the Tamil Sangam literature. The legends speak of 3 great academies, or Sangams, the first of which was held in a city called Madurai. Not the Madurai we know today, but a southern capital that was swallowed by the sea thousands of years ago. As the ice melted and the sea levels rose, sometimes by mere inches a year, and other times in sudden, catastrophic surges,
The low-lying plains of the Kumari Ridge began to vanish. It is a strange thing to consider how a landscape disappears. It does not happen all at once, like a curtain falling. Instead, it is a gradual retreat. First, the salt marshes begin to creep inland. The freshwater wells turn brackish and bitter. The coastal forests, once lush and vibrant, become stands of bleached, skeletal trees as the salt poisons their roots. The people move their villages to higher ground, watching as the landmarks of their ancestors, the burial mounds, the sacred groves, the ancient stones, are slowly surrounded by the encroaching tide. Eventually, what was once a vast plain becomes a series of islands. The Kumari Ridge would have transformed into an archipelago, a chain of high points where the survivors of the rising waters gathered. Over generations, even these islands grew smaller. The maps of the mind had to be redrawn again and again as the distances between villages grew wider and the journeys by boat became longer and more perilous. This slow drowning of the land is etched into the collective memory of the South, a trauma passed down through the centuries until it became myth. Scientists who study the bathymetry, the measurement of the depth of the ocean floor, have noted that the topography of the Indian Ocean floor near the southern tip of the subcontinent is uniquely suited to this narrative. The gradual slope of the continental shelf means that even a modest rise in sea level would have reclaimed thousands of square miles of territory. During the meltwater pulses that followed the last glacial maximum, the sea could have advanced inland at a rate that was visible within a single human lifetime. A grandfather might point out to sea toward a patch of empty blue and tell his grandson that a great city once stood there, that the fields where he once played are now the hunting grounds of the shark and the ray. This process of submergence was not unique to Kumari Kandam, but the scale of the lost territory in the Indian Ocean is particularly profound. The flooding of the Sunda and Sahul shelves effectively cut off entire populations, isolating cultures and forcing a massive migration toward the interior of the continents. As the heartland of the South began to sink, the survivors would have moved north, carrying with them the fragments of their knowledge, their language, and their grief. We often think of the end of the Ice Age as a triumph of nature, a blossoming of life as the cold retreated. But for the inhabitants of the drowned lands, it was an apocalypse in slow motion. The rise of the oceans was a silent thief, stealing the earth from beneath their feet. The Kumari Ridge, which once stood as a bridge or a vast peninsula, was slowly reduced to a memory, a ghost of a continent that exists now only in the echoes of the deep-sea sonar and the verses of the ancient poets. As we look at the maps of the world today, we see fixed borders and permanent shores, but the history of the post-glacial sea level rise reminds us that the Earth is fluid, and the map is merely a snapshot of a single moment in deep time. The drowned world of Kumari Kandam lies there still, resting in the cold, dark silence of the abyss. The ruins of its cities, if they remain, are covered in layers of marine sediment, protected by the very water that claimed them. The scientific evidence of the melting glaciers and the rising tides provides a physical framework for the legend, a skeleton upon which the flesh of the myth can be hung. It suggests that the stories of a lost continent are not merely fantasies or allegories, but are instead the oldest eyewitness accounts in human history, the testimony of a people who watched the world change and who refused to let the memory of what was lost be washed away by the tide. The waters of the Indian Ocean hold many secrets, and as the years pass, our ability to peer into those depths increases. We find ourselves looking for the signatures of human life in places where we were told no life could be. We search for the hearths and the homes that were abandoned 10,000 years ago, resting on the quiet slopes of the Kumari Ridge, and in that search we find a bridge between the world of science and the world of legend,
a realization that the earth remembers what we have forgotten, and that the story of the drowned world is, in many ways, the story of us all. As the currents move silently over the submerged plains, we are left to wonder how much of our true history is written in the sand of the ocean floor, waiting for the light of discovery to finally reach the depths. The rise of the sea was a beginning as much as it was an end, a transformation that shaped the modern world and left us with a haunting question. What else remains hidden beneath the blue horizon, in the long dark shadows of the deep?
The sound of a modern research vessel is a low rhythmic hum, a vibration that travels through the steel hull and dissipates into the vast emerald expanse of the Indian Ocean. It is a sound that contrasts deeply with the silence of the world below, where the pressure of the water holds the secrets of the past in a cold, eternal embrace. For decades, we looked at the surface of the sea as a mirror, reflecting only the sky and our own curiosity. But in recent years, technology has allowed us to peel back that blue veil. Modern sonar mapping has begun to reveal a landscape that was never meant to be seen by human eyes again, a complex topography of drowned valleys, jagged ridges, and vast, level plateaus that once felt the warmth of the sun and the tread of living feet. These are not merely geological features. They are the skeletons of a world that existed before the maps were drawn, a silent architecture of stone and silt that whispers of a time when the geography of our planet was a different story entirely. As the sonar pulses travel down through the dark layers of the water, bouncing off the seabed and returning to the surface, they create a digital ghost of the terrain below. We see the 90 East Ridge, a massive underwater mountain chain that stretches for thousands of kilometers, and the Laccadive Chagos Ridge, which some researchers suggest may have served as a high-altitude spine for a much larger landmass. To look at these maps is to realize that the ocean floor is not a flat, featureless desert, but a rugged, drowned continent, scarred by the movements of tectonic plates and the relentless rise of the tides at the end of the last ice age. The data shows us ancient riverbeds, carved into the continental shelf by fresh water that has not flowed for 10,000 years. These paleo-channels, as scientists call them, are the fingerprints of a lost world, tracing the paths where great rivers once emptied into a sea that was hundreds of feet lower than it is today. While the satellites and research ships survey the deep from above, there are those who have seen the mysteries of the shelf with their own eyes. Along the Coromandel coast, near the ancient port of Pumpuhar, the local fishermen have long spoken of things that do not belong in the natural order of the reef. They tell stories of their nets snagging on sharp, rhythmic edges that feel like the corners of hewn stone, and of clear days when, looking down through the turquoise water, they can discern the outlines of walls and plazas stretching away into the gloom. These are not the jagged, chaotic shapes of volcanic rock, but the orderly, right-angled geometries of human intent. For generations, these accounts were dismissed as folklore, or the tricks of light and shadow. But the persistence of these reports eventually drew the attention of those who seek the truth beneath the waves. Divers who have ventured into the turbulent waters near the mouth of the Corvery River have returned with tales that blur the line between myth and reality. They speak of massive stone blocks, some over 5 meters long, arranged in horseshoe shapes or long, straight lines that defy the random scattering of the tide. In the year 2001, explorations using side-scan sonar revealed a structure over 30 meters long, lying at a depth of nearly 25 meters. It appeared to be a wall, or perhaps a pier, constructed with a level of precision that suggests a sophisticated understanding of engineering. To touch these stones is to reach across a gulf of time that is almost impossible to comprehend. They are covered in thick layers of marine growth, encrusted with shells and swaying kelp, yet the deliberate hand of a mason still seems to pulse through the cold granite. The work of deep-sea archaeology is a slow and meditative process, a struggle against an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human presence, In the southern reaches of the Indian Ocean, the currents are powerful and unpredictable, churning up the fine silt of the seabed and reducing visibility to a few fleeting inches. A diver may spend hours hovering over a single site, waiting for a moment of clarity, only to have the sediment swirl back in a thick brown cloud. The physical toll is immense, but the intellectual challenge is even greater. In the world of archaeology, we rely on stratigraphy, the study of layers of soil and rock that accumulate over time, much like the pages of a book. But the ocean is a chaotic librarian. The tides wash away the delicate evidence of the past, mixing artifacts from different eras and burying entire structures under meters of shifting sand. To find a single fragment of pottery or a carved tool in this vast, moving desert is a feat of patience that borders on the miraculous. Beyond the physical debris, researchers look for signs of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt cooling and subsequent rapid warming that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. This was a time of cataclysmic change when the melting of the great ice sheets caused the sea levels to surge upward in a series of pulses. For those living on the low-lying plains of Kumari Kandam, the sea would not have been a distant threat, but a relentless intruder, reclaiming the land inch by inch, year by year. Radiocarbon dating, a method of measuring the decay of carbon atoms to determine the age of organic material, has been used on wood and shell fragments recovered from the seabed, often returning dates that align perfectly with these ancient floods. The science suggests that what we call legends may actually be the traumatic memories of a people who watched their world disappear beneath the horizon. As we move further from the shore, the challenges grow exponentially. The deeper the water, the greater the pressure, and the more expensive and dangerous the exploration becomes. Much of the area where Kumari Kandam is said to have existed lies in depths that are beyond the reach of conventional scuba equipment, requiring remotely operated vehicles and submersibles that few institutions can afford. And so, the vast majority of the Indian Ocean floor remains unmapped in high resolution, a dark frontier that is less understood than the surface of the moon. We are left to piece together the story from fragments, a sonar image here, a fisherman's tale there, a cluster of stones half buried in the silt. It is a puzzle where most of the pieces are missing, and those we do have are worn smooth by the passage of millennia. Meanwhile, the sea continues its patient work, slowly dissolving the evidence of what once was. The salt air and the crushing weight of the water are the enemies of memory, turning iron to rust and wood to dust. Only the stone remains, and even the stone is slowly reclaimed by the coral and the sand. There is a profound loneliness in these underwater ruins, a sense of a civilization that was once vibrant and full of song, now reduced to a silent foundation for a reef. As the sun sets over the Indian Ocean, casting long golden streaks across the water, it is easy to imagine the cities that might still be down there, their towers standing like sentinels in the blue twilight of the deep. They are the echoes of a lost heritage, a reminder that our hold on the earth is more fragile than we care to admit. The search for Kumari Kandam is not just a search for a place, but a search for our own origins, an attempt to understand how we became who we are in the wake of a changing world. It requires us to look at the ocean not as a barrier, but as a vast archive, a library of stone and shadow that holds the middle chapters of the human story. Every new dive, every sonar sweep that reveals a straight line where there should be a curve, brings us a step closer to the truth. And yet, the more we discover, the more we realize how much we have lost. The scale of the drowned world is so immense that it humbles our modern ambitions, reminding us that time is a river that eventually carries everything away to the sea. We are left to wonder, as the currents move silently over the submerged plains, how many more cities are waiting to be found in the long, dark shadows of the deep? The ocean keeps its secrets well, but the echoes are there if only we have the patience to listen to the rhythm of the waves. Consider for a moment the sound of a heavy rain falling upon a thatched roof, a sound that has remained unchanged for thousands of years, carrying with it a strange mixture of comfort and a primal, lingering dread. This rhythm is the heartbeat of a story told in every corner of the earth, a story of a world that was once whole, and then, in a single night of rising tides and celestial fury, was torn asunder. As we look upon the maps of the submerged Kumari Kandam, we are not merely looking at a localized legend of the Tamil people. We are looking at a mirror reflecting a global trauma. This narrative of a lost paradise, swallowed by the insatiable hunger of the sea, is perhaps the most persistent ghost in the mansion of human memory. It is the universal flood archetype, an ancient echo that refuses to be silenced, whether it speaks from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia, the dialogues of Plato, or the palm leaf manuscripts of ancient Madurai. The parallels are so striking that they seem to suggest a shared origin, a singular moment in deep time when the world truly did end for those who lived upon the coastal plains. In the Western tradition, we speak of Atlantis, that glittering island continent beyond the Pillars of Hercules, described by the philosopher Plato as a pinnacle of civilization that vanished beneath the waves in a day and a night of misfortune. Further east, in the cradle of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, who built a great vessel to survive a deluge sent by the gods to quiet the clamor of humanity. And here, in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, we find the Pandyan kings of Kumari Kandam, forced to flee their ancestral homes as the sea reclaimed the land, inch by agonizing inch. These stories are not identical, yet they share a skeletal structure that is impossible to ignore: the existence of a highly advanced society, a sudden or progressive cataclysm involving water, and a small group of survivors who carry the embers of their culture to new, higher ground. Philosophically, we might wonder if these tales are a form of collective psychological processing, a way for our ancestors to make sense of the vast, uncaring power of the natural world. To the ancient mind, the sea was not just a body of water, but a hungry deity, a boundary between the known and the unknowable. When the sea rose, as we know it did, during the period archaeologists call the Younger Dryas, a time roughly 12,000 years ago, when the Earth's climate shifted violently and glaciers melted with terrifying speed, the impact on human consciousness must have been profound. This was a time of meltwater pulses, where the global sea level could rise by several meters in a matter of decades. For a civilization built upon the fertile, low-lying plains of a continent like Kumari Kandam, this was not a gradual change to be managed. It was the slow-motion drowning of their entire reality. The psychological impact of these rising seas created a scar on the collective subconscious that has never truly healed. It is why the story of a lost paradise resonates across all cultures, regardless of their geography. We all feel a certain phantom limb pain for a home we can no longer reach, a place where the laws of the world were more harmonious, and where the wisdom of the ages was kept in great libraries that now rest beneath leagues of silt and salt. This resonance is not merely a matter of historical curiosity, it is a reflection of our own fragility. As we walk through our modern cities of glass and steel, there is a quiet voice in the back of our minds that whispers of the tides. We recognize the story of Kumari Kandam because on some deep cellular level, we remember the sound of the water lapping at the door. In the study of these myths, we often encounter the term stratigraphy, which is the way archaeologists read the layers of the earth like the pages of a book with the oldest stories at the bottom. But there is also a stratigraphy of the soul, layers of inherited memory that tell us the world was once much larger than it is today.
when the ice caps melted and the ocean levels rose by over 100 meters, millions of square miles of habitable land were lost forever. This was not a myth. It was a geological fact.
The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, the Doggerland beneath the North Sea, and the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean floor were all once dry land, teeming with life and, quite possibly, the first flickers of organized society. The Mesopotamian flood myths, such as the story of Atrahasis, often depict the flood as a divine punishment for the noise of humanity, a metaphor, perhaps, for a civilization that had grown too large, too complex, or too disconnected from the rhythms of the earth. In the Tamil tradition, however, the loss of Kumari Kandam is often viewed with a sense of profound melancholy and spiritual longing. It is a lost golden age of literature and poetry, a time when the first Sangams, or literary academies, were held under the patronage of gods and legendary sages. The loss of the land was the loss of the word, the drowning of a language that was said to be the purest expression of the human spirit. As the years passed and the survivors of these deluges settled in the highlands of South India, Suma, or the Mediterranean, they brought their stories with them. These stories were the only things that couldn't be drowned. They were whispered around fires and carved into stone, growing more elaborate and mystical with each passing generation. The physical reality of the rising water became the spiritual reality of a fallen world. We see this transition from history to myth in the way the dates of these events are recorded. While modern science uses radiocarbon dating, a method of measuring the decay of carbon atoms to determine the age of organic materials, the ancient chroniclers used the cycles of the stars and the reigns of semi-divine kings. Though the methods differ, they often point toward the same window of time, that turbulent era at the end of the last ice age, when the map of the world was being rewritten by the hand of the ocean. There is a certain comfort in this universality, to know that the people of ancient India were dreaming of the same lost world as the people of the Americas or the Near East suggests that we are more connected than our modern borders would have us believe. We are all children of the flood, descendants of those who stood on the shore and watched their history disappear beneath the whitecaps. The story of Kumari Kandam is not just a Tamil story, it is a human story. It speaks to our innate fear of being forgotten and our desperate hope that something of our lives will endure after the great deep has claimed its due. Meanwhile, the ocean continues its slow rhythmic work. It grinds stone into sand and turns grand palaces into artificial reefs, indifferent to the names of the kings who once ruled there. We are left to piece together the fragments. A line of poetry here, a submerged stone structure there, trying to reconstruct a puzzle whose pieces have been scattered across the seabed. The universal flood archetype serves as a bridge between the cold data of geology and the warm, breathing reality of human experience. It reminds us that behind every scientific meltwater pulse, there were families fleeing their homes, poets mourning their lost verses, and a civilization realizing, for the first time, that the earth beneath their feet was not as permanent as they had believed. As we dwell on these connections, the mystery of Kumari Kandam deepens. It ceases to be a mere legend and becomes a testament to the resilience of memory. Why does the story of a lost paradise resonate so deeply? Perhaps because it is true, not just in a literal historical sense, but in a spiritual one. We all carry a sense of having come from somewhere else, a place of greater light and understanding that has been obscured by the passage of time and the rising of the dark waters. In the silence of the night, when the world is still and the only sound is the distant rhythmic breathing of the sea, we can almost hear the echoes of that drowned world, calling to us from the shadows of the deep, reminding us of who we were before the waves began to rise. Sound is a curious traveller, moving through the air and the water with a persistence that defies the fragility of the human voice. In the quiet hours of the night, It is easy to imagine that the words we speak are merely the latest ripples in a vast, ancient ocean of language, an ocean that traces its headwaters back to a source now hidden beneath the salt and the silt. Many scholars of the southern traditions believe that the roots of the Tamil tongue, and indeed the entire Dravidian language family, do not begin on the shores of the modern Indian subcontinent, but rather in the fertile, vanished valleys of Kumari Kandam. They speak of a Proto-Dravidian mother tongue, a linguistic ancestor that flourished in the deep isolation of that southern landmass long before the first stone was laid in the cities of the north. This isolation is a crucial piece of the mystery. When a land is cradled by the sea for thousands of years, protected from the constant migrations and conquests that blur the edges of continental cultures, its language begins to grow in unique, profound ways. It becomes a mirror of the landscape itself. On Kumari Kandam, the language would have been shaped by the specific rhythms of its rivers, the particular calls of its birds, and the unique geometry of its mountains. It was a world unto itself, and so its speech developed a complexity and a structural purity that felt eternal. Linguists often look at the way words are built, the way suffixes are stacked like delicate bricks to create intricate shades of meaning, and they wonder if such a sophisticated system could have evolved in a vacuum. Perhaps it did not. Perhaps it evolved in the long, undisturbed silence of a continent that no longer exists, a place where the mind had the time and the peace to craft a tool of expression as refined as a gemstone. As we consider the depth of this time, we must look at the surviving Sangam literature, those ancient collections of poetry and grammar that serve as the last flickering candles in a darkened room. These texts, some of which are said to be fragments of much older works saved from the rising tides, describe a world of immense intellectual achievement. They speak of the first and second academies, the legendary gatherings of poets and sages who met in cities that the ocean has since reclaimed. In these verses, the grammar is already perfect. The vocabulary is already vast. There is no sense of a language in its infancy. Instead, we see a language in its majestic prime, suggesting that by the time these poems were recorded, the tongue had already been polished by thousands of years of use on the lost southern plains. The grammar of these ancient texts is more than just a set of rules. It is a map of a way of thinking. The way the ancient speakers of Kumari Kandam categorized the world, dividing poems into the internal world of the heart and the external world of action, reveals a civilization that valued balance and introspection. This structural harmony is a hallmark of what we call Proto-Dravidian, the hypothetical common ancestor of languages like Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam. While mainstream linguistics often places the origin of this family in the central or northern regions, the legends of the south insist on a different geography. They tell us that as the waters rose and the continent began to fracture, the keepers of the language fled northward, carrying their scrolls and their oral traditions like precious seeds to be planted in new soil. Imagine, for a moment, the journey of a single word. A word for mother, or water, or star. This word begins its life in a sun-drenched city near the equator, spoken by a navigator watching the constellations from a high stone tower. As the centuries pass and the sea encroaches, the word travels. It is whispered on the decks of ships fleeing the great flood. It is chanted by priests as they establish new temples on the higher ground of the Western Ghats. It is carved into palm leaves by scholars who realize that their homeland is fading into myth. By the time the word reaches our ears today, it has been weathered by time, yet its core remains unchanged. The preservation of such ancient linguistic traits is a testament to the reverence the survivors had for their past. They did not just want to survive. They wanted their history to breathe through their speech. There is a concept in linguistics known as glottochronology, a method of estimating the time when two languages diverged from a common source by studying the rate of change in their core vocabulary. When we apply these thoughts to the Dravidian family, we find ourselves peering into a horizon that stretches back 5,000, 6,000, perhaps even 10,000 years. This timeline aligns hauntingly well with the end of the last ice age, a period of dramatic sea level rise that geologists call the meltwater pulses. During these windows of deep time, the geography of the world was rewritten. Land bridges vanished, islands were swallowed, and the coastal plains of the Indian Ocean were drastically reshaped. In the midst of this geological upheaval, the language of Kumari Kandam would have been the thread that held the identity of the people together, even as their physical world dissolved beneath their feet. The Sangam texts describe the loss of these lands with a poignant clarity. They do not speak of it as a sudden, singular event, but as a series of Cradle calls, a Tamil word that translates roughly to seizures by the sea. Each time the ocean claimed a piece of the kingdom, the center of culture had to shift. And with each shift, the language adapted, yet it tenaciously held on to its ancient grammar, a grammar that many believe was codified by the sage Agastya himself. Agastya is a figure of mythic proportions, a bridge between the divine and the human, who is said to have brought the first light of grammar to the southern people. In the quiet logic of the sleep state, we might see Agastya not as a single man, but as a symbol for the collective memory of a civilization, the personification of the effort to keep the lost language pure in a changing world. We often think of language as something that evolves toward greater complexity, but in the case of the lost continent, the theory suggests something different. It suggests that the language reached a peak of perfection in the distant past, and that all subsequent history has been an effort to maintain that high standard. The precision of the ancient Tamil vowels, the specific placement of the tongue against the roof of the mouth to produce the unique retroflex L sound, these are not accidents. They are the echoes of a specialized acoustic environment. Perhaps the very sounds of the language were designed to carry over the crashing of the surf, or to resonate within the great stone halls of the drowned academies. As we drift further into the history of this submerged world, we must ask ourselves what else was lost when the language was fragmented. Every language carries within it a specific way of seeing the stars, a specific way of understanding the medicinal properties of plants, and a specific philosophy of time. When the southern landmass was lost, much of that specialized knowledge may have become untranslatable. The words that remain are like the tips of icebergs, small visible fragments of a massive hidden body of wisdom that rests in the cold darkness of the seabed. We see the influence of this lost world in the way the southern languages treat the concept of home and landscape, weaving the two together so tightly that one cannot be described without the other. The sea is a silent keeper of secrets, but language is a restless one. It refuses to be buried. It survives in the names of hidden reefs that fishermen still call by the names of ancient mountains. It survives in the nursery rhymes that have been passed down for 100 generations, their original meanings forgotten, but their rhythms intact. And it survives in the very structure of the thoughts we have as we fall towards sleep, the way our minds seek out patterns and connections in the dark. The drowned world of Kumari Kandam may be gone from our maps, but as long as the ancient grammar endures, as long as the mother tongue is spoken on the sun-warmed coasts of the south, the continent is never truly lost. It lives on in the breath of the speaker, a ghost of a civilization that continues to whisper its story to anyone who is willing to listen to the silence between the words. Imagine, for a moment, the scent of crushed sandalwood and damp earth rising from a forest that has not felt the sun's warmth in 10,000 years. This was the air of Kumari Kandam, a realm where the geography was defined not just by mountains and valleys, but by a vibrancy of life that feels almost supernatural to our modern sensibilities. The ancient Sangam poems, those delicate vessels of memory, do not merely speak of a land, they speak of a living, breathing entity, a primordial ecosystem that thrived in the long shadow of the Laccadive-Chagos Ridge before the great melt of the glacial era. In these verses, we find descriptions of exotic wildlife that defy the categories of contemporary biology, creatures that seem to occupy the hazy border between the physical world and the world of myth. The poets sing of birds with plumage the color of molten copper, whose songs could supposedly harmonize with the shifting tides of the Indian Ocean. They describe flora that bloomed only once every 12 years, draping the hillsides in a purple so deep it looked like the bruises of a setting sun. This was a world of high biodiversity, a sanctuary of the Holocene where the climate remained steady and temperate while the rest of the globe struggled through the erratic shifts of the younger Dryas, that sudden, 1,000-year return to Ice Age conditions that gripped the northern latitudes. While the north froze, the southern continent basked in a perpetual humid grace, allowing for the evolution of species that have long since vanished into the stratigraphy of the seabed. At the heart of this fertility lay the Pahruli River, a waterway whispered to be the lifeblood of the entire continent. In the ancient texts, the Pahruli is not just a river, but a sacred presence, a silver thread that stitched together the 49 territories of the south. It was said to have been carved into the earth by the ancient kings themselves, a feat of hydraulic engineering that sounds like high fantasy until we consider the sophisticated irrigation systems found in the later Indus Valley, or the submerged megaliths off the coast of Pumpuha. The river brought down the rich volcanic silt from the northern mountains, depositing it across the vast plains of the south, creating a landscape so fertile that a single seed dropped by a passing traveller was said to provide enough fruit for a family for a season. The Pahruli was more than a source of water. It was the center of a spiritual ecology. The people of Kumari Kandam viewed the river as a goddess in liquid form, a cooling balm against the tropical heat. They built their cities along its banks, not in defiance of the water, but in a quiet, rhythmic partnership with it. As we look at the bathymetry of the ocean floor today, the study of the underwater depth and shapes of the terrain, we can see the ghost channels of these ancient rivers, deep canyons carved into the continental shelf that align perfectly with the traditional descriptions of the Pahruli's path. These are the silent witnesses to a time when the water ran fresh and clear over stones that are now encrusted with salt and coral. In this lush, river-fed world, two animals rose above all others as the keepers of the continent's soul, the elephant and the peacock. In the southern realm, the elephant was not merely a beast of burden or a tool of war, but a symbol of the earth's own weight and wisdom. The poems describe vast herds of mountain-like elephants that roamed the interior forests, their ivory tusks supposedly so long they could reach the ground, etched with the history of their lineages. These were the guardians of the passes, the companions of the sages who sought solitude in the high caves of the Meru mountains. There is a sense of profound kinship in the way the ancient Tamils spoke of these giants, a recognition that the elephant's slow, deliberate pace was the true tempo of the continent itself. And then there was the peacock. If the elephant represented the heavy, enduring earth, the peacock was the manifestation of the sky's hidden brilliance. In the gardens of the lost capital, Madurai, thousands of these birds were said to dance during the monsoon rains, their iridescent fans reflecting the flashes of lightning in the dark clouds above. The peacock was the emblem of the southern kings, a reminder that beauty and power are inseparable. To the poets, the sight of a peacock unfolding its tail was a cosmic event, a localized version of the universe expanding. They saw in its 1,000 eyes the watchful gaze of the ancestors, looking out from the spirit world to ensure the balance of the ecosystem remained undisturbed. As the years passed and the sea levels began their slow, inexorable rise, a process we now understand through radiocarbon dating of coral reefs and ice core samples, this delicate balance began to tip. The Pahruli River, once the source of life, began to struggle against the encroaching salt of the ocean. The elephants, sensing the change in the vibration of the earth, were said to have begun a long migration toward the northern highlands, leaving behind the sinking plains of their birth. The peacocks took flight, their cries echoing through the thinning forests like a lament for a world that was being reclaimed by the waves. We often think of extinction as a sudden event, a flash of fire or a catastrophic flood, but for the inhabitants of Kumari Kandam, the end of their primordial world may have been a slow, agonizing realization. It was the salt stunting of a favorite fruit tree, the disappearance of a specific butterfly that once swarmed by the millions, the way the river water began to taste of the sea. This was a loss of habitat on a continental scale, a quiet drowning of a garden that had been tended for millennia. The exotic wildlife, the sacred river, and the symbolic beasts were not just parts of the scenery. They were the very fabric of the culture's identity. When the habitat vanished, the stories became myths, and the myths became the only evidence that such a paradise ever existed. Today, as researchers use sonar to map the dark plains of the Indian Ocean, they find anomalies that suggest a landscape far more complex than a simple seabed. There are plateaus that look like ancient terraces and depressions that mimic the curves of a winding river. Beneath the silt of 10,000 years, perhaps the remains of those great elephants lie preserved, their tusks resting in the quiet dark. Perhaps the seeds of those extinct flowers are still there, held in a cold, pressurized sleep, waiting for a sun that will never reach them. The drowned world remains a puzzle of deep time, a reminder that the earth is a restless thing and that the ecosystems we rely upon are but temporary guests on a planet that remembers everything and promises nothing. And so, we listen to the ancient poems, not as mere fiction, but as a biological record, a field guide to a lost world that continues to haunt our collective memory with the ghost of a peacock's cry and the steady, rhythmic pulse of a river that once flowed toward the dawn. The scent of old paper and the quiet scratch of a fountain pen across parchment seem to carry the same weight as the crashing waves of the Indian Ocean. For in the modern age, Kumari Kandam has migrated from the depths of the sea into the fertile soil of the human heart. It is a transition that has occurred slowly, almost imperceptibly, as the ancient verses of the Sangam were rediscovered and breathed into the lungs of a new generation. Today, the lost continent does not merely exist in the speculative maps of geologists or the dusty shelves of colonial archives. It lives in the vibrant colours of contemporary Tamil cinema, the rhythmic pulse of modern poetry, and the quiet, steady pride of a people who look to the horizon and see not a void, but a home. As the years passed, the image of the sunken kingdom became a powerful metaphor for resilience and the enduring nature of identity. In the quiet studios of Chennai and the bustling creative hubs of the global Tamil diaspora, artists began to reconstruct the world that the water took. They do not paint it as a tomb, but as a garden. You might see a mural on a city wall depicting the mountain peaks of Pahruli, or a digital illustration where the spires of a lost capital rise through a turquoise haze surrounded by schools of shimmering fish and forests of coral that mimic the architecture of ancient temples. These images serve as a bridge, a way for the modern mind to touch the untouchable. In the cinema, the legend of Kumari Kandam is often invoked to explain the unexplainable, providing a grand, epic backdrop for stories of love, loss, and the search for origins. It is a narrative device that turns the vast expanse of time into something intimate and personal, allowing a viewer in a darkened theatre to feel the spray of a sea that dried up or sank 10,000 years ago. Meanwhile, the poets have found in the drowned world a language for the unspoken. To write of Kumari Kandam is to write of the cradle, a word that appears frequently in contemporary Tamil literature. It is described as the place where the first word was ever spoken, where the first song was sung, and where the first laws of human kindness were established. This idea of a lost cradle provides a profound sense of continuity. In a world that often feels fractured and fast-paced, the belief in a deep ancestral foundation offers a sense of gravity. It suggests that no matter how far the branches of a culture may spread, the roots are anchored in a soil that is ancient, sacred, and indestructible, even if it currently rests beneath 1,000 fathoms of salt water. There is a delicate balance at play here, a quiet dance between the rigorous skepticism of the historian and the luminous truth of the cultural imagination. To the archaeologist, the lack of physical evidence, the absence of stone walls or clay pots on the seabed, means the continent must remain a myth, a beautiful fabrication of the human spirit. They speak of the Younger Dryas, that period of erratic climate shifts and rising tides, approximately 12,800 years ago, and they point out that while the sea levels did indeed rise, the geological record does not show a massive landmass disappearing overnight in the way the legends suggest. They rely on stratigraphy, the study of rock layers, and radiocarbon dating to map the past, and in their maps, the Indian Ocean has looked much the same for many millennia. And yet, for those who carry the story of Kumari Kandam, these scientific measurements are only one way of knowing the world. There is another kind of truth, a cultural truth that does not require a carbon date to be valid. This perspective suggests that the memory of the land is more important than the land itself. If a people believe they come from a place of great wisdom and antiquity, that belief shapes their values, their art, and their treatment of one another in the present day. The lost continent becomes a moral compass. It represents an ideal state of being, a golden age of harmony and intellectual achievement that serves as a goal for the future. In this sense, Kumari Kandam is not behind us, buried in the silt of the past, but ahead of us, a vision of what society might once again become. As we contemplate this balance, we begin to see that the lost world is never truly lost as long as it is being imagined. Every time a student reads the ancient accounts of the three Sangams, the continent rises a little further from the depths. Every time a musician composes a piece inspired by the rhythm of the waves at Kanyakumari, the ghost of the Pahruli river flows again. It is a slow, quiet reclamation of history. The technical terms of science, the bathymetry of the ocean floor, the tectonic shifts of the Indo-Australian plate are essential for understanding the physical world, but they cannot capture the feeling of a grandmother telling a child about the kingdom of the Pandyan kings that once stretched to the south. The modern imagination treats Kumari Kandam as a living entity, a presence that haunts the coastline and whispers through the palm fronds. It is a reminder that our stay on this planet is governed by forces far greater than our own ambitions. The earth is a restless thing, constantly reshaping its borders and reclaiming its treasures. By holding on to the memory of the drowned world, the modern era acknowledges its own vulnerability. We are reminded that the cities we build today, the roads we pave, and the monuments we raise are but temporary guests on a planet that remembers everything and promises nothing. This realization does not lead to despair, but to a deeper appreciation for the present moment and a profound respect for the ancestors who witnessed the world change and found a way to tell us about it. And so, the story of Kumari Kandam persists, not as a fossilized relic, but as a fluid, evolving part of the human experience. It bridges the gap between the deep time of the earth and the brief span of a human life. It allows us to stand on the edge of the ocean and feel a connection to a horizon that no longer exists. There is a certain peace in this mystery, a comfort in knowing that some parts of our story are kept safe by the sea, far beyond the reach of the shovel and the brush. As we drift further into the quiet of the night, we can almost hear the echoes of that lost world, the steady, rhythmic pulse of a civilization that refuses to be forgotten, living on in the songs, the stories, and the dreams of those who still look to the south and wonder what lies beneath the blue. The water is an ancient, patient librarian, holding volumes of history in its cold, dark vaults, where the light of the sun has not touched the pages for thousands upon thousands of years. We often think of the ocean as a void, a blue emptiness that separates the places where we live, but in the quiet of the night, it is easier to see it for what it truly is, a vast, heaving memory. Every wave that washes against the shores of Kanyakumari carries with it the microscopic weight of a world that once was, a world where the mountains of the south stood tall, and the rivers ran through valleys that are now nothing more than silent trenches in the seabed. There is a profound stillness in the realization that our maps are merely temporary sketches, drawn in a brief moment of geological time, and that the earth beneath our feet is constantly in a state of slow, rhythmic flux. As we lie here in the safety of the present, we can begin to visualize the grand cycles of the deep time that govern our planet. These are the breaths of the earth, the slow inhalation of the ice ages when the water is locked away in massive glaciers and the continents expand their reach, and the long, warm exhalation of the interglacial periods when the ice melts and the sea reclaims its territory. Kumari Kandam exists in the space between these breaths. It was a kingdom of the lowlands, a place that thrived when the world was colder and the coastlines stretched miles beyond their current limits. To look at the ocean today is to look at a flooded room where only the tops of the tallest furniture remain visible above the surface. We stand upon the peaks of a submerged world, unaware of the vast hallways and grand libraries that lie just beneath the waves. The secrets of the Indian Ocean are guarded by more than just depth. They are protected by the sheer scale of the passage of time. When we speak of the Younger Dryas, that sudden, sharp return to glacial conditions nearly 13,000 years ago, we are speaking of a period that reshaped the very face of the world. It was a time of cataclysmic shifts in climate, a moment when the melting of ice dams could send walls of water rushing across the globe, altering the stratigraphy, the layers of sediment and rock, in ways that make it difficult for modern archaeology to find a clear path. A city built of wood and earth, submerged for 10 millennia, does not leave behind the same sharp edges as a Roman Colosseum. Instead, it becomes part of the sea itself. It dissolves into the silt, its stones are smoothed by the currents until they are indistinguishable from the natural reef, and its stories are absorbed into the salt. And so we must accept that there are things we may never fully reveal with the tools of science alone. Radiocarbon dating, which measures the decay of carbon atoms to tell us the age of organic matter, requires a physical sample to test. A piece of charcoal, a fragment of bone, a bit of woven cloth. But the sea is hungry, and it consumes the soft things first. What remains is the memory, preserved in the oral traditions of the Tamil people, passed down through generations like a torch through a long, dark tunnel. These stories are a different kind of evidence, a living stratigraphy of the human spirit. They tell us that humanity has survived these rising tides before, and that, even when our lands are lost, our identity remains anchored to the memory of where we came from. Meanwhile, the currents continue their eternal work, moving sand from one place to another, uncovering a carved stone for a decade before burying it again for a century. There is a rhythm to this concealment, a slow dance between the visible and the hidden. Perhaps it is better this way. There is a certain dignity in a civilization that remains unconquered by the modern gaze, a world that exists only in the quiet spaces of our imagination and the deep, rhythmic pulse of the tides. As the mind begins to settle, we can imagine ourselves drifting over those calm, sapphire waters. The surface is as smooth as glass, reflecting the stars of a southern sky that have watched over this region since the first poets sang their verses in the courts of the Pandyan kings. Below us, the water is clear and cool, a deep, inviting blue that fades into a soft, velvety darkness. In this darkness, the lost continent of Kumari Kandam is not a ruin, it is a dream of perfection. We can see the outlines of the Pahruli River as it winds its way through emerald plains that never fade. We can sense the presence of the great mountain of Meru, its peaks reaching up toward the surface like the fingers of a sleeping giant. Everything here is still. There is no wind to rustle the leaves of the sunken forests, no sound but the faint, distant hum of the ocean's heart. It is a place of absolute rest, where the worries of the surface world cannot reach. The rising and falling of lands, the shifting of empires, the ticking of clocks. All of these things are meaningless in the deep blue of the eternal sea. As the years pass, the ocean will continue to rise and fall, and the lands we know today may one day join the lost world of the south. This is not a cause for sorrow, but a meditation on the beautiful transience of all things. We are part of a long, continuous chain of life that stretches back into the mists of the pre-flood world and forward into a future we cannot yet see. To think of Kumari Kandam is to remember that we are guests on a living, breathing planet, one that keeps its own history in the layers of the earth and the depths of the water. Let your thoughts sink now, like a smooth stone dropped into a still pool. Feel the weight of the day dissolving into the cool, dark water, leaving behind only the peaceful rhythm of your own breath. You are drifting further and further away from the shore, out into the vast expanse of the southern sea, where the secrets of the past are kept safe. The water is warm, the air is still, and the horizon is a soft, blurred line where the blue of the sea meets the blue of the night. There is nothing left to do but let go, allowing yourself to be carried by the gentle current of history, back to the beginning of all things. The temples of the lost continent are silent now, their bells stilled by the weight of the ocean, but their presence is felt in the deep, resonant calm that surrounds you. You are part of the mystery, a witness to the cycles of time that turn as slowly as the stars. The world above is far away, a distant memory of light and noise. Here, in the cradle of the Indian Ocean, there is only the silence of the deep and the comfort of the unknown. The lost world is not gone, it is simply waiting, resting beneath the waves, just as you are resting now. As the last echoes of the stories fade, the image of the blue water remains, a vast, shimmering blanket that covers the cradle of civilization. It is a world of soft edges and muted colors, a place where time has no meaning and the only reality is the steady, peaceful flow of the tide. You can feel the coolness of the water against your skin, a gentle pressure that lulls you into a deeper state of relaxation. The ocean is a mother, holding the memories of her children in a long, eternal embrace. Sleep comes as easily as the tide, washing over the shore of your mind, erasing the footprints of the day and leaving behind a smooth, clean expanse of sand. The sun has long since set over the submerged peaks of the south, and the moon casts a silver path across the surface of the water, a bridge between the world we know and the world that was lost. Follow that path into the quiet, into the stillness, into the deep, dark heart of the mystery. Kumari Kandam is there, in the silence between breaths, in the space between thoughts, a kingdom of peace that will never be disturbed. The sea is high, the world is old, and all is as it should be. There is a finality in the water, but also a promise. What is lost is never truly gone, it is merely transformed, held in trust by the earth until the cycles turn once more. For now, the secrets are safe, the library is closed, the lights are dimmed, and the great southern continent sleeps beneath the waves, undisturbed by the passage of centuries. And as you join that sleep, you carry with you the quiet wonder of the drowned world, a reminder that even in the darkness there is a profound and lasting beauty. The waves continue their slow, rhythmic pulse, in and out, in and out, a heartbeat that has echoed through the ages. Listen to the sound of the sea and let it guide you into the deep. The journey is over, the story is told, and the lost world of the south is at peace. And so are you, and so are you.